Marvel's characters have starred in some truly fantastic movies over the years, with the likes of Blade, X2, X-Men United, Spider-Man 2, Iron Man, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Deadpool, Black Panther, and Avengers Infinity War being amongst the very best superhero movies ever made. However, some planned Marvel movies that ended up getting cancelled could have been just as good as the ones we just mentioned. Spider-Man trilogy is one of the most iconic comic book movie franchises in cinematic history. While 2004's Spider-Man 3 somewhat tarnished the trilogy, 2002's Spider-Man and in particular 2004's Spider-Man 2 are some of the most critically revered movies of their kind. With that in mind, a fourth movie would have been very welcome, not least to end a franchise that on the whole is a beloved one on a high. Spider-Man 3 suffered from all kinds of problems. Too many villains, an awful Venom, and some very bizarre and out-of-character behavior from its titular hero. And Raimi hated it. While he would have loved the chance to rectify the movie's errors with a fourth installment, the director felt under too much pressure to make the movie the best he could in the allotted time. It was due to be released in May of 2011, but Raimi wanted longer. When he was denied an extension, he pulled out of the project, and we'll never know if he could have fixed the franchise. We could have seen the likes of Vulture, Shocker, Prowler, Chameleon, Mysterio, or Rhino, all of which would have been very welcome at the time. And although we've seen a couple of those guys in other Marvel movie franchises since then, it would have been nice to see Tobey Maguire's version of Spidey taking them on. Okay, strap yourselves in for this one because there is a lot of bizarre information to take in. Back in 1980, a Silver Surfer movie nearly got made, starring producer Lee Kramer's girlfriend Olivia Newton-John. Yes, that's right, the Herald of Galactus, who is otherwise known as Norrin Radd and is very much a male character, was almost played by a female. The actress who played Sandy Olsen in Grease 2 years earlier, no less. But what was perhaps even weirder than that is that it was going to be a musical, just like Grease was, and that the Beatles' Paul McCartney was approached to do the soundtrack. Moreover, McCartney was seriously interested in getting involved. If you didn't know already, McCartney is actually a comic book fan. And he even wrote a song about Magneto, Titanium Men, and the Crimson Dynamo. With that in mind, it's maybe not so surprising that he expressed an interest in making this happen. In fact, there's even proof of this interest being the case in the form of a letter from McCartney's manager. Now, we're not saying that this would have been any good, but it just sounds so ludicrous that we don't think we'd have been able to take our eyes off it. You know, in the same way that you can't take your eyes off a road accident when you drive by it. It's fair to say that live-action versions of The Punisher have received a mixed reception over the years. First, there was Dolph Lundgren's version of the character in 1989's The Punisher. It was terrible. Then in 2004, Thomas Jane played the violent vigilante in a movie of the same name. And although he was certainly far more suited to the role than Lundgren was, the movie as a whole was equally as bad. In 2008, Ray Stevenson played the character in Punisher Warzone, and again, it was horrible. Most recently, however, The Walking Dead's Jon Bernthal has been playing the character otherwise known as Frank Castle in the Marvel Cinematic Universe on Netflix's The Punisher, as well as Daredevil. And he has been absolutely fantastic in the role. But between 2004 and 2008, there could have been a great Punisher movie with Sons of Anarchy creator Kurt Sutter writing it, which really does just seem like the perfect pairing. Sutter's script was ultimately rejected because he says he tried to add too much emotion to the character, in an attempt to give his overly violent nature some meaning, and that just wasn't what the newly created Marvel Studios were looking for at the time. As a result, we got the aforementioned terrible Ray Stevenson movie instead. And in hindsight, that really is a huge shame. At the start of the new millennium, the X-Men movies really did take the world by storm. Believe it or not, the mutant characters we now know so well weren't exactly household names back then. But the franchise soon became incredibly profitable. In the year 2000, X-Men made movie audiences aware of the characters, and 3 years later, X2 X-Men United blew them away. One of the more popular characters in the franchise was, without a doubt, Sir Ian McKellen's Eric Lehnsherr, aka Magneto, the leader of the Brotherhood of Mutants. Thanks to the success of the franchise and the popularity of Magneto as a character, Fox wanted to continue that momentum by looking at the Master of Magnetism's origins. Sadly, they decided against it and opted to simply touch upon his backstory in the likes of X-Men First Class and X-Men Days of Future Past. However, given how brilliant both the X-Men franchise and Magneto as a character are, we'd all jump at the opportunity to get a deeper look into Magneto's backstory. His past is both intense and heartbreaking, and it would have been amazing to see exactly how the Holocaust shaped a young, scared Eric into becoming a man who would go on to be one of the most powerful and ruthless mutants in the world. Scarlett Johansson has played Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe since 2010, when she made her first appearance in the franchise in Iron Man 2. Since then, she's played a major part in the MCU, appearing in a further 5 movies, including all 3 Avengers movies as part of the titular team. Finally, she's getting her own movie in the franchise, although a release date and title are yet to be revealed. But her character could have been given a solo outing before the MCU ever existed, as X-Men, X2, and Watchmen writer David Hayter had a script penned for it in the early 2000s. It was set on the backdrop of the splintered Soviet Empire and would have seen Black Widow attempting to prevent a barrage of nuclear missiles being launched. Sadly, the likes of Blood Rain, Ultraviolet, and Aeon Flux had given female-led action movies a bad name at the time, and the movie was cancelled before it ever truly got off the ground. It's a real shame because Hayter is a huge Black Widow fan, and it would have been a real passion project. Heck, he even named his daughter Natasha because of the character when he was attached to the movie, and was quoted as saying, "I named my daughter after a movie that I wasn't working on anymore." Back in 2013, Marvel Studios head honcho Kevin Feige announced that he was confident that an Inhumans movie would be made, and it was strongly expected to be part of Phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Had it ended up happening, there was every chance the Inhumans would have been the perfect replacements for the X-Men in an MCU that didn't have access to mutants. With a species of superpowered individuals in the franchise, the whole Disney-Fox deal that looks set to be completed this year might not ever have become a thing. However, rather than turn the property into a movie, Inhumans became a television show, still as part of the MCU, but which was, quite frankly, absolutely awful. It ran on ABC from September to November in 2017, but by March of 2018, it was dead. That's how bad it was. The special effects and costumes looked embarrassingly cheap and tacky, and the acting wasn't exactly stellar either. There's no doubt in most fans' minds that had Kevin Feige been in charge of Inhumans and a movie ended up being made, it would have been watchable at the very least, and we'd have loved to watch it. By now, the Inhumans could have been every bit as popular as the X-Men in mainstream popular culture. Instead, they're pretty much a laughingstock. The Marvel Cinematic Universe now has its Doctor Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch has portrayed the character since 2016, when Scott Derrickson directed the Sorcerer Supreme's solo movie. While it's worked out well, we're all still angry that another potential Doctor Strange movie never happened. Author Neil Gaiman has said that he was in very early talks with Marvel about writing a movie based on the character, and he would have brought the master of modern Gothic, Guillermo del Toro, on board to direct. How cool would that have been? For some reason, however, Marvel didn't go for it. Why, Marvel? Are you insane? This was the perfect collaboration for a Doctor Strange project. It would have been amazing! Del Toro is the best Gothic horror director in the world, with a particular love of monsters, and Gaiman is known primarily for his beloved metaphysical comic book The Sandman, all of which sounds exactly like a Doctor Strange movie. Man, we're seriously ticked off that this never happened. Interestingly, back in 1992, the late Wes Craven was also attached to direct a Doctor Strange movie for a 1994 or 1995 release. Given that his most famous creation is the Dream Demon Freddy Krueger, can you imagine how cool a depiction of the Doctor Strange villain Nightmare would have been in a Wes Craven movie? Mort the Dead Teenager is certainly one of the more obscure properties in Marvel's catalog, which is really saying something given the wide array of weird and wonderful characters the company have created over the years. And there was very nearly a movie based on it. To say we're curious as to how it would have turned out would be a huge understatement. It's about Mort Graves, a bullied teenager who died in a car accident when the brakes didn't work while he was racing another teen in his father's old-fashioned car. He was, however, revived as an undead being by Teen Death, who taught him how to haunt those who bullied, disliked, and used him when he was alive. At his funeral, a young girl, Kimberly, revealed her feelings for Mort, leaving him enraged. but he ultimately ended up being allowed back on Earth to spend his afterlife with her. The movie was in development for years, with big names like Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, and Quentin Tarantino attached to produce at various points. It would have had Elijah Wood in the title role and Jessica Simpson as the undead Mort's love interest. It all just sounds so wonderfully bizarre, to the point that we hope the project is resurrected just like Mort himself was in the near future. When Guardians of the Galaxy was announced as the 10th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe back in 2012, very few people expected it to be any good. Hardly anybody who wasn't a comic book fan had even heard of the space-traveling team of misfits. They just seemed too obscure to possibly be popular in a mainstream movie. But when the movie was released in 2014, it pleasantly surprised everyone and was a huge success. With that in mind, an even more obscure cosmic Marvel offering, Alien Legion, could have been made for a fantastic movie, had it been made back when it was rumored to be in development in 2009. The movie, based on a series created for Marvel Comics' Epic Comics imprint back in 1983, was set to be produced by Jerry Bruckheimer and Disney, with Derek Haas and Michael Brandt writing a script for it that was apparently very much reminiscent of Pirates of the Caribbean. The movie made it to a third rewrite before falling into development hell, with the storyline having been imagined as a foreign Legion in space story featuring humanoid serpentine characters. Had it been released, Guardians of the Galaxy might have never happened. The Legion might have been the Guardians' replacements. So it's probably for the best that it wasn't, even if it does sound like it might have been extremely fun and interesting. The Amazing Spider-Man movies in 2012 and 2014 were, in truth, treated harshly. British actor Andrew Garfield made a very decent Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and neither of the movies he starred in were terrible, but they just weren't spectacular enough, and sadly didn't earn enough at the global box office for Sony to justify continuing the franchise. As a result, the studio came to a deal with Marvel Studios and Disney to allow Marvel's flagship hero to appear in the company's flagship movie franchise, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Another Brit, Tom Holland, was cast as Spidey, and the rest, as they say, is history. However, had the Amazing Spider-Man franchise continued, we could have been given a really cool movie. Drew Goddard was writing a script with a view to directing a movie based on the villainous team known as the Sinister Six. Rhino, Vulture, Dr. Octopus, Mysterio, and Kraven the Hunter had all been teased in the franchise, while the Green Goblin was set to lead the team. Sandman was also rumored to be a potential member, so what the exact lineup would have been is unclear. But seeing a team-up of 6 classic Spidey villains on the big screen would have been awesome. Of course, we might yet get a Sinister Six movie at some point in the MCU, and it's safe to say nobody would complain about that.